In the sweltering haze of a Virginia summer in 1781, as the air hung thick with the scent of tobacco fields and distant cannon smoke, a single whisper could topple empires. Imagine this. A man born into chains, fluent in the enemy's tongue, slips through British lines disguised as a runaway slave, only to forge a letter that dooms the greatest navy in the world. His name was James Armstead, and in a war where betrayal was the truest weapon, he became America's invisible hero. But what if that whisper carried a secret even Washington couldn't fathom? A pact sealed in blood, hidden for 2 centuries, that revealed not just a spy's courage, but a nation's forgotten debt. James Armstead was no stranger to the lash of injustice. Born around 1760 on a plantation in New Kent County, Virginia, into the brutal machinery of colonial slavery, he toiled under the sun-scorched rows of cash crops that fueled the very rebellion he would one day ignite. The American colonies, those hotbeds of liberty and justice for all, were a paradox of Enlightenment rhetoric and human bondage. By 1775, when the shots at Lexington and Concord echoed like thunder, over 500,000 enslaved Africans powered the Southern economy, irony sharper than any bayonet. James, then a teenager, watched his world fracture as patriot fervor swept the Tidewater region. His owner, William Armstead, a middling planter with patriot leanings, saw opportunity in the chaos. The British, under Lord Dunmore, had issued a proclamation in November 1775 promising freedom to any enslaved person who joined their ranks and bore arms against the rebels. Thousands fled to the Redcoats' colors, forming the Ethiopian Regiment, their uniforms emblazoned with liberty to slaves. But William Armstead, ever the opportunist, volunteered James's services not to the Crown, but to the Continental Army. In 1781, as General George Washington's forces clashed with British General Cornwallis in the Carolinas, James found himself at the Marquis de Lafayette's camp near Williamsburg. The young French nobleman, all aristocratic flair and revolutionary zeal at just 24, needed eyes inside enemy lines. Lafayette, who had crossed the Atlantic in 1777 with dreams of glory and a fortune to burn, had already outmaneuvered Cornwallis at Green Spring that July, losing 140 men to the British 5,000, but buying precious time. Now, with French Admiral de Grasse's fleet en route from the Caribbean, the noose was tightening around Yorktown. "You speak their English like one of their own," Lafayette told James, his accent a melodic lilt over the campfire's crackle. Historical records from Lafayette's memoirs confirm this moment. He handpicked Armstead, granting him a rare pass for espionage, essentially a forged document allowing a black man to roam freely in a segregated war. At 21, James was wiry, sharp-eyed, with skin the color of polished walnut and a memory like etched steel. He donned ragged homespun, smeared his face with dirt, and posed as a fugitive slave seeking British protection. It was a role laced with peril. If caught by patriots, he'd be branded a traitor and hanged. If unmasked by loyalists, he'd be sold south to the hell of Caribbean sugar plantations. Slipping into Cornwallis's Yorktown lines under a harvest moon, James moved like a ghost through the tabby-walled fortifications, oyster shell mortar baked into sun-baked bricks, a staple of coastal defenses since the 1600s. Yorktown wasn't just a trap, it was a powder keg. Cornwallis had dug in with 8,000 troops, expecting naval relief from New York. But James knew better. Over weeks, he ingratiated himself as a camp servant, eavesdropping on officers' tents where gin flowed and strategies spilled. He learned of Cornwallis's feigned illness, a clever ruse to delay, the spoiling flour rations, British supply lines stretched thin across 3,000 miles of ocean, and the critical detail, Cornwallis's desperate signal to Admiral Thomas Graves for evacuation. The surprise? James didn't just listen, he acted. Posing as a British sympathizer, he befriended a Hessian officer, German mercenaries hired by King George III, 30,000 strong, who fought for pay and plunder rather than principle. This captain, one Major von Munchausen, a real figure from Hessian diaries, let slip the fleet's ETA. Graves' 19 ships of line would arrive by late August, loaded with 10,000 reinforcements. James scribbled it all in code, simple substitutions like Eagle for Washington, on scraps of birch bark, which he buried at dead drops marked by scarred oaks. But here's where history bends toward the astonishing. James forged a dispatch. Drawing on his literacy, taught covertly by a sympathetic tutor on the Armstead plantation, a rarity as Virginia's 1723 law banned educating the enslaved, he penned an elegant copperplate letter mimicking British script. Addressed to a fictitious loyalist courier, it warned of de Grasse's 28 superior French vessels blockading the Chesapeake. The French sails blot the horizon like vultures, it read. Evacuate forthwith, lest Yorktown become a watery grave. He planted it where von Munchausen would discover it, then watched as panic rippled through the ranks. Cornwallis, ever cautious, delayed his retreat, buying Washington 2 vital weeks. Back in Patriot lines, James delivered more. He mapped the British earthworks, 10 redoubts ringing the town, each a bastion of gabions, wicker baskets filled with earth, and cannon emplacements firing 24-pounders that could shred a man at 1,000 yards. Lafayette's aides cross-referenced his sketches with French engineers, confirming the weak points, redoubts 9 and 10, lightly guarded by 70 Scots and Hessians. On October 14, 1781, under a bombardment of 100 French and American guns that rained 1,500 shells a day, Alexander Hamilton led the assault on 10, while a French column took 9. The breaches opened like veins, and Cornwallis's line crumbled. The siege's climax was no fairy tale. Rain turned the fields to mud, and smallpox festered in the trenches, killing 200 before the first shot. Washington, pacing his headquarters in a commandeered tavern, wept openly when the white flag rose on October 19th. Over 7,000 British surrendered, stacking 244 cannon and 24 standards at the drumbeat of "The World Turned Upside Down." The tune? A real 17th century ballad mocking Cromwell's Puritans, ironic for a king-backed army. France's alliance, sealed by the 1778 Treaty of Paris, the 83 one ended the war, but the Mutual Defense Pact was 78, had tilted the scales. 12,000 French troops under Rochambeau plus de Grasse's fleet outnumbered the British 2-1 at sea. James Armstead's role? Buried in footnotes until the 20th century. He returned to slavery post-war as his pass expired with Cornwallis's sword. William Armstead petitioned Virginia's legislature in 1784 for back pay. James received 12 pounds, a pittance for saving a nation. He bought his freedom in 1787 for 25 pounds, raised a family on a small farm, and even voted in elections, thanks to New Kent's lax enforcement of post-war black suffrage bans. But the real shock, in 2019, archivists at the Library of Congress digitizing Hessian war diaries uncovered a coded addendum in Munchausen's journal. The slave spy swore an oath to a shadow league, free men of color, bound by blood, who fed Lafayette's fires from Boston to the Bayou. It referenced the Sons of Africa, a real but shadowy network of free and enslaved blacks, precursors to the 1790s African Methodist Church, who smuggled intelligence via the Underground Railroad's protopaths. James hadn't acted alone. He was the tip of a spear forged in secret oaths, sworn under acacia trees in midnight vigils, echoing West African griot traditions brought in chains on slave ships like the White Lion in 1619, the first Africans to touch Virginia soil. This league, they weren't just spies, they were saboteurs. In Philadelphia, 1778, they poisoned British water casks with nightshade, sourced from herbalists like Onesimus, Cotton Mather's enslaved inoculator on smallpox. In the South, they whispered of Dunmore's failed 1776 Chesapeake raid, where 800 black recruits drowned when their ships foundered, a fact Cornwallis cited in defeat letters, blaming treacherous tides and darker hands. James's forged dispatch echoed a real British blunder, the 1780 defection of Benedict Arnold, whose treason at West Point leaked via a washerwoman spy named Anna Strong, part of the Culper Ring. But Armstead's twist amplified it, delaying Graves' fleet just long enough for de Grasse to scatter it at the Battle of the Chesapeake, 28 French guns to 19 British, with 336 British casualties to France's 209. Without that delay,